Val Mayerik has been a staple of the comic industry for over 40 years. Val is a multi-talented guy. In addition to drawing and painting, he's an accomplished actor. He's an accomplished horseman. And we've had the pleasure of working together on a number of projects, including the Bruce Lee comic, Shadow Man for Valiant. And most recently, Val contributed a vital page to the Florida Man graphic novel. But more? All right. Val's also co-creator of Howard the Duck. And those who are friends with Val on Facebook know that he's been producing a series of Howard the Duck portraits that are just jaw-droppingly beautiful and diverse. And I hope that Val will put those out as a book or offer them in some published form at some time. Do you have any plans to do that, Val?
No, you just gave me the idea. So.
Well, you know, I've been telling you that I wanted to write the introduction to a Val Mayerik art book for years now, and I'm just itching to get at it.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple of publishers about doing like the Art of Val Mayerik kind of book. There's a few people around that are interested. It's just a matter of when the time is right, following up on it. And I want to make sure I have all the artwork, ready for reproduction that I want to have in that volume.
Val, how did you get into the business? I know you worked with Dan Adkins, who was a great inker.
The way I got into the business was an amazing stroke of serendipitous luck. Now that I look back on it, and I look back on all the possible obstacles I would have been confronting had I not met Dan, it's kind of mind-boggling. At the time, I just took it in stride. But I was attending Youngstown State University, which is a kind of a Midwestern, Northeast Ohio kind of a nowhere university if you're in the art department. They have a good engineering school and a good economics school, but the arts were definitely left a lot to be desired. I was in a painting class, and I was speaking with a guy named Joe Zabel. Now, you may not know that name, but Joe Zabel...
I do know that name.
Yeah, he does a lot of independent stuff. He did some work for Harvey Picar. At the time, we, of course, neither one of us were established in that sense, but we talked a great deal about comics. Mainstream comics and what was in existence then, the underground comics, which we really enjoyed. And there was a woman in our painting class who it seemed to us to be like an old lady because she was 35 and we were 22. And she just wanted to complete her degree in art because she wanted to teach. So she wanted to teach art in elementary school. So she was in a painting class, and she would heard us talking over a series of days. And she approached us and said, "Do you guys, you really like comics, huh?" And we said, "Yeah." She said, "Do you know, ever heard of a guy named Dan Adkins?" I said, "Yeah, he's an inker for Marvel." And she said, "Well, he just lives a few doors down from me." And that was our jaws just dropped. And I called Dan and I said, introduced myself, explained my interest in comic books, and asked him if I could come down to visit him. He said, okay. So I hopped in my Plymouth Fury and zoomed down there at about 85 miles an hour. It got to the neighborhood where Dan lives, very unassuming, middle-class neighborhood, and chatted with Dan. He liked my work. I really had no expectations of Dan taking me on as any sort of an intern or anything of that nature. I just wanted to meet a pro and show him what I could do. And then he explained to me how P. Craig Russell had already contacted him because Craig lived very close to Dan in just a nearby town called Wellsville. And he said Craig was already working with him in the studio, and he wanted to know if I would be interested in that. I was flabbergasted. I said, "Well, yeah." He says, "Well, I've got to talk to my wife because his studio was in his house, and he didn't know if she wanted yet another stranger traipsing through the house late at night." So he got back to me and said, "Yeah, come on down." So I moved down there, and Dan had a little drawing board set up for me, and Craig was in one corner, I was in another, and Dan had this massive music collection, and we got to work, and that was it. We Craig and I worked with Dan, we helped him ink a Submariner. We helped him finish pencil a Barry Smith Conan story, which Smith had only gotten to the point of blue pencils. We all got on a Greyhound bus and went to New York City for Dan to introduce us to Stan and Roy Thomas. Roy liked our work and said we could work for Marvel, and it was that easy compared to what one would have to go through today, or even what other guys might have had to go through at the same period of time. You know, getting an internship, say at DC or Marvel, hanging out with artists, hoping to get their samples looked at, and it just, I mean, I think within a series of 2 or 3 months, we were established, and we were working on our own titles, Craig and I, and as I said, that was just a stroke of incredible luck. Had I not met Dan, I don't know if I would have had the wherewithal and the discipline and the temperament to like move to New York and starve for a year before I got work. You know, it just would have been very, very difficult thing to do. I don't know if I was really prepared to do that, and fortunately, I didn't have to. So
when did you move to New York?
I remained in Ohio, worked with Marvel through the mail, and because there was no internet then, there wasn't even any Federal Express, so we would draw our pages and pencil the pages, mail them in. They were lettered and sent back to us to ink if indeed we were going to ink them, or sent off to an inker if someone else was going to ink them. I did that for about 2.5 years, 3 years maybe, and then moved to New York in early '77. That was a very productive time. I got to meet a lot of the pros that I had only seen their names. I made a lot of connections, which serve me to this day.
Did you join Neil Adams' studio at some point?
I worked with Neil, and I worked at Continuity for about a year. I was in New York for about a year, and was getting just spatterings of work, you know, a little bit of work here and there. I ended up on this nightmare deadline situation with doing the Howard the Duck newspaper comic strip, which Gerber had left he was so late, and the artist who was working on it at the time, Gene Colan, got so fed up with having to rush with deadlines that he quit. And Archie Goodwin asked me if I wanted to pick it up, and I said, yeah. It was a nightmare. It was constantly trying to catch up every day to the deadline, because newspaper deadlines are every day. So, and then finally the comic strip syndicate dropped it. They were tired of the whole thing being late, and so that was the end of that. And I needed to get back and establish and get some work. So I went to Continuity, talked to Neil, and moved in there. There were a whole lot of guys there at the time: Jim Starlin, Russ Heath, Joe Rubenstein, Larry Hama. If they weren't actually working with Neil, helping with advertising, they rented space there. There was like a small office space. A lot of writers were there. Marshall Rogers. It was a great time. I was there for about a year and a half.
It astonishes me that Steve Gerber would let an opportunity like that slip through his fingers. Why didn't he just write the strip? Why didn't he just write it?
Good question. I mean, I'm not telling tales out of school, and I certainly don't want to speak ill of those who have passed away. But Steve was just chronically late, and he knew it. Everybody knew it, and he sometimes would try to make some sort of excuse for it. Most of the time, he just would stay incommunicado and just not talk to anybody who was chasing him around, trying to get pages from him. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I was friends with Steve. I was friendly with Steve. I always enjoyed conversations I had with Steve, but I can't say we were close enough friends that I could even begin to guess at the answer to your question. You
knew Harvey Pekar, though, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't you contribute to some of his books?
Yeah, I did. I contributed to about 3 or 4 books. These were the annual Harvey Pekar American Splendor magazine-sized comics that he produced himself, that he published himself once a year.
I had them all.
Yeah, and I did stories I did at least 4 or 5 stories in about at least 4 different issues. I did 3 cover illustrations, a few of which showed up in the film American Splendor, the film about the kind of the biodrama about Harvey.
Nice.
Yeah, and that was I really enjoyed that. I mean, he didn't pay extremely well, but he paid on time, and he was real easy to work with. I mean, he knew what he wanted. He was the writer. It was Harvey's vision, not the artist. That was fine with me. I was tired of having to draw things that looked like superhero stuff all the time, and Harvey wanted stuff that looked like real just street people. And I enjoyed doing that work.
All of these influences you had around you. I'm just wondering if there were any artists or people that influenced you more than others as far as like developing your own style.
Yeah, it's one thing I can talk about artists that I admired a great deal, but I don't think that I really reflect. I don't think they affected my style. I think my style was just picked up by osmosis. So I look at the stuff that I do, and of course I don't know about other artists, but I have a hard time recognizing my style. I mean, I can recognize the style of other people, but then people say I've got a style, and I just think my stuff looks generic. I don't think.
No, it doesn't. You have an instantly identifiable style.
Yeah, but apparently I have a very identifiable style, and I look at it and I think, well, obviously there's the influence of Neil Adams, because I picked up some of his inking techniques. I do draw realistically. I don't stylize a great deal. I don't exaggerate the features of my characters to any great extent, unless it's called for.
Right.
And I also see some John Buscema in terms of my storytelling, because I inked a great deal. Back in the late '80s, early '90s, I inked a lot of John Buscema, and I just by osmosis picked up his storytelling, which was perfect. It was just so sound. It was so all there, without drawing overly muscled characters exploding off the damn page. And
right.
So I can see how Buscema had influenced me, and I think that's about it. Maybe even a little bit of Wally Wood, because Dan's was of course an acolyte of Wally Wood, and I can recall Wally Wood's work that he did in Mad Magazine having a real impact on me as a kid. I just looked at that and said, God, that's just beautiful detail, that beautiful inking. So I think whenever I do ink with a brush, I always think in terms of how Wally Wood would handle that. And when I ink with a pen, I'm thinking more Neil Adams, I think. And again, I'm not thinking it, but that's what's coming through, I think.
Right.
I should mention that Val is also an accomplished martial artist, which lends credence to his fight scenes, which is a thing of mine ever since I entered comics, was to try and portray martial arts in a realistic and dynamic manner. And Val and I worked on a number of projects, one of which was the Bruce Lee comic, the one from Malibu. I understand there have been a number of subsequent Bruce Lee comics, and I haven't really read them, so I can't speak to them, although they look to be very cartoony and more in the manga style.
I haven't seen those, but that doesn't surprise me that they would take that direction.
Yeah, especially with that market and everything.
Yeah.
If Val and Mike fought, who would win?
Val would win. Are you kidding? I've done a little training with Val, and he hits like a mule. I'm just a feeble old man.
Wow.
I'm lucky I can stay upright.
Well, we're all aging. I don't have the. I'm sure I don't have the impact in my punches and kicks, especially my kicks, because I don't have the flexibility in my legs I used to have, for two reasons. I just simply don't practice kicking that much anymore, and secondly, because I'm riding horses all the time, and so it's just going counter to the flexibility you require. Because when you're riding a horse, you're squeezing with your legs from time to time, or you're using the adductor muscles inside the thigh to draw your legs in to apply pressure to the horse's side. So I'm shortening those muscles without even realizing it. So then, and by not stretching, I think I only can kick half as high as I ever did.
You put out a book a couple years ago about Custer's Last Stand.
Yes.
Called Blood and Dust.
Yes. Graphic novel. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a magnificent book. It's done landscape style, so it's not the kind of thing you see sitting on a comic shop shelf. This is by landscape style. I mean, it's mostly horizontal, and I wonder, do you have any of those images on that computer that you could bring up?
Do I?
Yeah.
Put
No,
him
I
on the
don't.
spot.
Well, hang on 1 minute, because I have the book right behind me. Let me grab it.
What about your all the stuff you've done with horses and horse riding?
Oh, well, geez. I mean, as a kid, I rode horses whenever I could, although my family
You
never
guys
owned
just
one.
sitting there? You got to
No,
talk.
we're talking about
You
horses.
gotta talk.
Oh, he's
Yeah,
gonna start.
as a kid, I rode horses a lot, but they were like my neighbor's horses. My family never owned one, and then it wasn't until my early 30s that I had my first horse. Since then, I've had 5 other horses. But I began to play polo. I did some I did a little bit of jumping, and then the horse jumped, of course, and then
Right.
I had a friend out in Eastern. I was still living in Ohio, and I had a friend out in Eastern Oregon who had a ranch, and I sometimes would work with him. You know, just ride do ranch riding, not so much roping and stuff, but just herding cattle from one pasture to another, going up and
Boy,
finding
this is
calves.
such a beautiful book.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Is it available anywhere?
Jim Barry has a whole lot of them in his garage. We had a lot of them published. We've sold a great many. A lot of them went out as rewards to the people that donated to the Kickstarter, but they're still available. Absolutely.
And you're working on another Kickstarter with Jim now, aren't you?
We're trying to get it together. Yeah, we are hoping to do it early February.
What is the subject?
I don't want to reveal all of it. I'll just say it's a Western. It is a Western.
Oh, cool.
And there's some science fiction elements thrown into it.
Oh, I know.
Not aliens. So it's not cowboys and aliens. But there are some other sci-fi elements that are interwoven throughout the story, which is going to make it a little more interesting than just a straight Western. So.
Wow, and that'll be very interesting with your realistic style too.
Yeah, some of it I get to get a little more. I can play with some different imagery a little differently than I normally do, because these sci-fi elements are kind of surreal in their nature. They're not
right.
They're not real naturalistic. So.
Well, now, Val, you've done a series of paintings that are related to this book over the years, and the paintings have been available in art store in galleries, right? People can walk into those galleries and see those paintings.
Yeah, and many of the paintings, not many, I'd say half of those paintings of that particular genre have been sold. Wow. But you can get prints. Art prints are available if you contact the gallery. It's called the Adobe Western Art Gallery in Fort Worth, Texas. Adobe, as in the building material, Western Art Gallery in Fort Worth.
That's awesome, especially with you knowing horses and everything so well, to be able to.
Yeah, and then I didn't quite finish, but when I played polo for a while, and that was very expensive, and it was bankrupting me. But it's addicting. It's an addicting game, and I couldn't give it up. I left Ohio, and I married this lovely lady from Russia, and we went to Oregon, and our son was born, and we discovered when he was about 2 years old that he had autism. So we had to direct all our resources towards helping him. So I did not have a horse for a good 15, almost 20 years. And I really missed it, but I compensated it, by just going back to another martial arts school in near Portland, and became very good friends with some guys I trained with there. I'm still friends with. And then when we moved to Texas, things had kind of equalized themselves in terms of what we needed to do for our son and what we could do for ourselves. And I bought a really good ranch quarter horse here that I'm hoping to see this evening, actually.
His name is Donnie.
His name's Donnie, and that was the name he came with. So not a name I would have chosen, but he knows his name because the young lady that owned him prior to that had him very well trained, and he's a very people horse. He likes being around people. So when I go to the ranch, he can be like so far away I can be able to see him, and I say, "Hey, Donnie," and he comes trotting up to me, just like a dog. It's just really nice.
Many comic book artists have to draw horses, and sometimes they draw a horse and it looks like a dog.
Yeah.
Val doesn't have that problem. So once again, let's just throw this up here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, some artists really have a knack for that. Frazetta really didn't know that much about horses. I was at his museum before he died, and he wasn't there, but Ellie was, his wife. And I said, "Does Frank ride horses? Has he spent time with them? Because he certainly gets a feel for them." She goes, "No, Frank's just a genius." So,
Do you know what it says on Frederick Remington's tombstone?
I do not.
He knew horses.
That's for sure. Yeah. That was really one of my influences to it. And going back to my influences, not so much in comics, but when I'm painting horses, I'm always thinking in terms of Remington. His brushwork, especially, he could just by the kind of brush techniques he chose, he could indicate speed on a horse or strength. There was nobody quite like that guy.
He didn't use speed lines either.
No. So I haven't heard any questions about the duck, man. I'm shocked.
He's itching to talk about that. We figure everybody else hammers you about him.
I talk about it all the time, but I mean, usually that's the first question. That's like this: how'd you get into comics? And tell us about Howard the Duck. That's usually what I hear.
Yeah.
Well, are you a co-owner?
I am a co-owner. Yes.
Wow.
Well, I'm not actually. No, I'm not a co-owner. Marvel's the owner.
Right.
Steve Gerber and I are co-owners of the graphic novel we did back for Epic Comics, Void Indigo. I am absolutely 50% co-owner of that.
But you're not free to do new Howard the Duck stories.
No, not at all. Marvel's been kind in the sense that they tend to not give me any problems in terms of me, doing Howard the Duck paintings and selling them at conventions, and that's very nice of them. But short of that, no. If I started my own Duck series, I would have to disguise it. I mean, it would have to. I couldn't do it. Let's put it that way. I couldn't do it the way I would want to do it. I couldn't do it and still maintain the integrity of that character.
Have anything you can share that you haven't already shared before?
Well, that's the thing, is it's all kind of anticlimactic. The
Right.
irony of the Howard the Duck story is how easily it happened.
Yeah.
Today, if Marvel was to introduce a new character, especially a bizarre character like that into the Marvel
Right.
universe, it would go through God knows how many meetings and committees. And
Yeah.
is it PC enough? Is it not? Is it this? Is it that? And this was just as simple that Steve had a story in which the Man-Thing has some psychic ability to open portals to other dimensions. Now, how psychic abilities, are able to do that, it's never explained. But
Right.
and so he does, and all sorts of characters come through this portal. There's like a Gandalf kind of wizard guy. There's a Conan the Barbarian type guy. There's a Red Sonja sort of warrioress, and there was some other creature, and Howard was one of them, and he came from Duck World and from the Duck universe.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was just that simple. And the fans that read that issue of Fear 19, they went nuts. They said, we love this duck. We want to see more of this duck. And I never had to do any pre-production, any preliminary sketches to be okayed by Steve or Roy Thomas. That was the first duck I came up with, and that's the first one you see. And when it came time for the Marvel to decide to do a book of its own, I was not considered as the artist. I don't know why. At the time, I didn't really care because I was having a lot of fun working on a lot of their monster comics, their classic monster comics. So I think it was
Frank Brunner.
Yeah, Frank Brunner. And
He's a great artist.
Yeah, Brunner worked on it for quite some time and really developed the character to the point where it was a consistent looking character for quite some time. And even after Brunner quit and Gene Colan took over, Colan still pretty much stayed with the the character design that Brunner had developed, and that was the character design that I still work with. He looks a little more like Donald Duck, but that to me is what makes it even funnier.
Right.
The present incarnation of the duck to me is, I don't know, it looks like a pigeon. It just doesn't look like a duck. And when the fans when they request sketches, they want that older incarnation of the duck.
They want
that
the
older
foul
iteration.
mouthed fowl.
Pardon? Yes.
They want the foul mouthed fowl chomping on a
Right.
cigar.
Whatever interest in me is resurrected at this point that allows me to be invited to conventions and getting any fan acknowledgement at this point. It tends to be through the duck. They want duck sketches, and the people that invite me because they bill me as co-creator of Howard the Duck, and
Yeah.
so the duck has been very good to me in recent years. In terms of getting recognition back in the industry, but other than that, I did those few issues of Man Thing with the duck, and then the duck went off to Brunner's hands and Steve, and it never. Well, Steve did want it as a kind of a vindictive response to Marvel, losing his suit to Marvel and not being able to retain ownership. He did that series for, I forget who, I think it was through Eclipse. Destroyer Duck.
Right.
Destroyer. It wasn't Jack Kirby the artist on that?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was. And I did a backup story on Destroyer Duck. It wasn't anything to do with the duck at all. But I did work with Steve then. So again,
I'm very interested in your the monster comics that you were talking about that you were doing, because that seems like that would be really cool in your style, and I have not seen those.
There was the Living Mummy and the Frankenstein monster.
Okay.
And I think I did about 6 or 8 issues of each before they canceled the books.
Right.
And yeah, I get a lot of requests for that too, from fans for sketches. The Mummy or the Frankenstein. I never did Dracula. That was Gene Colan.
Yeah.
And those were really nice. Colan's work was really, really good.
I'm assuming you did like pencils and inks on the monster books.
On most of them, yeah. Dan inked 1 or 2 mummies. Klaus Janson inked a mummy. I had various inkers on the Frankenstein monster, none of whom were satisfactory to me. I inked the last 2 issues of the Frankenstein monster myself. I never had good luck with inkers. Part of it was my own fault. I used a lot of halftones with the pencil, and I wasn't really clear on where solid lines should be sometimes. Right. And I know I had inkers that could see that. I had some really good inkers that could. Joe Rubenstein was one.
Yeah.
Actually, Neil Adams inked a couple of panels of my work when I was at Continuity. And those
Nice.
guys like that who really know how to draw themselves,
right,
can figure out what I'm doing. But people that have just been trained to be inkers,
yeah,
and inking primarily in the superhero style,
right,
they just didn't quite know what to do with my stuff, and I think they did their best, but a lot of times it just didn't look like what I was drawing.
You always kind of doing some painting on the side or whatever, or was that a gradual transition or something for you?
Well, I that was my dream in art school, to be a working illustrator.
Yeah.
I liked comics, and comics certainly was opened the doors to me to get in to become a working artist, a working illustrator. But
right.
When I was a kid, I just I worshipped the work of Norman Rockwell,
right,
and all those really great illustrators of the 50s, Al Parker and Dorn, and those guys were just incredible. And the art school that I attended, I mentioned earlier, that where I had met that woman who introduced me to Dan, or directed me to him. That school was very substandard, and that's art department. And they were all working on modern and postmodern stuff. So everybody was just throwing paint against the wall. Anyway, that's all that was going on there. And if you wanted to do realistic painting, you were scorned, and just literally scorned and embarrassed and so I could never learn any painting techniques or any sort of pick up any of the skills that I needed to become a working illustrator. But I did draw, and I did read a lot of comics, and so that's what allowed me to have an entree into being a working artist in the comic book world. But I was just self-taught. I just would buy books of the great illustrators, and just sometimes, like some of the Norman Rockwell books, they would actually have chapters that shows procedurals. This is what Norman did. This is first he took a photograph, then he did this. He gessoed his canvas this particular way. He used these paints. He did an underpainting like this. He glazed over this one and draw all these different techniques. And I would just literally have to pick these up from books. And then most of the books were not that explicit about this stuff, because back in those days, people were not revealing their secrets as to how they created what they did. When I got to New York City, I knew that Boris Vallejo, you know who Boris is?
Oh, yeah.
Boris lived in Yonkers, I believe, or upstate New York, but not far from Manhattan.
Wow.
And I threw Dan, now we're talking about way pre-internet, any of that stuff. So Dan had everybody's phone number, because Dan was such a nosy guy. And if he couldn't find the phone number, he would get Steranko to find it for him, because Steranko knew everybody. So he had procured Boris's phone number for me. And I called Boris and I said who I am. I just moved to New York and I'd like to come up and see what you do. And Boris very generously allowed me to do this. Wow. And I've always liked his work. He's an extraordinarily technically beautiful artist, but of course my hero was Frank Frazetta, but I was not able to contact him. So I went to Boris's studio, and he very kindly showed me his entire process, like how he comes up with he does the preliminary sketch, how he transfers it to canvas. He works on a gessoed board. The paints he used, the brushes he used, and how he would do an acrylic underpainting and then do the oil painting on top of that. Wow. All of which was very, very valuable to me, because I didn't know guys were doing it like this. I had no idea how painting, what the genesis of a really good illustration was. And I just kept looking for people like that throughout my entire, up until I was probably in my 40s or 50s. I mean, I'm always still even looking around at, having access to a real artist and going to their studio and saying, how are you doing this? And how are you doing that? I have no compunction about seeming like an ignorant kid, because we all ultimately are still ignorant kids. And I'll just ask guys, even if they're a lot younger than me, say, wow, how did you do that? Yeah. And then they tell me, and then I know how to do it now. So,
do you have a preferred style of painting as far as like acrylics or oils? Or
I work in all the different media. I love watercolor. A lot of the Howard the Duck paintings that Mike was referring to, those were done in acrylic. Right. A lot of the cowboy stuff I'm doing is oil, primarily because that's just the traditional. That's the traditional oil painting has been like the traditional medium of Western painting, because you can do things with it if you're doing landscapes and skies that are difficult to do with acrylic. You can do it. I mean, there are people like Joe Jusko who can do anything with acrylics. Right. But I find acrylics to be really, really convenient. If I want to do a really quick duck painting, and they dry immediately, and once they're dried, they're solid. They're plastic. You can drop a coffee and a milkshake on those things and scrape them off, and they wouldn't even affect them. The only downside to oils is they take so long to dry. Yeah. To really dry. I mean, they'll be dry to the touch in a few days, but you really can't say they're dry for 3 to 6 months. That's how long they take to dry. So when I move them to a gallery, if they need varnished or something, I have to wait for 3 to 6 months to varnish them, because the gallery wants them looking nice and lustrous. So he mentioned earlier that sometimes I'm an actor. Right. And I have done a lot of theater and some movies and some TV work. And a few years ago, Christopher was shooting a low budget science fiction film in a town called Kyle, Texas, which is about 30 miles south of Austin, where I live. And through a mutual friend, I found out that an actor had quit. He had to drop out because of he got another role that was going to pay more money or something. So he asked if I would step in, and I said certainly. And so I stepped into this role, went down and did all the shooting. And Christopher and I just liked what Christopher was doing. I liked his approach to getting some independent film work done. And so we became friends. We shared information about films we liked. And then, as it turned out, we decided to do a project of our own. It was a short film that I've been wanting to shoot for years. And we're just wrapping that up, actually.
He was telling us a little bit about when you guys first met on, what's the name of the film again?
Oh, The Quantum Terror.
Quantum Terror, right?
Yeah, that was through James Hudnall. God rest his soul. James was helping out. He was doing a little bit of script doctoring. And right. I had another gentleman cast, but that actor kept being called away to higher paying gigs.
Right.
And very kindly said, look, I'm going to have to bow out. I can't keep, he didn't want to keep jerking me around. So
right.
James said, hey, I know this guy, Val Mayerik, and I knew the name. And James said, I think it had actually talked about you before. But in those circles, it just said, hey, give him a call. He'll probably fit this role, which was a detective. And Val, I think, got the script on Friday and showed up on Sunday and just went for it. And is nice. Fantastic. And we've had a great working relationship pretty much ever since then. Val is very invested. I'm sure he's talked about how much he loves acting. He's as much an actor as an artist, and people don't get to see that side of him too much because, of course, they're familiar with Howard the Duck and his work on Conan and
right.
a bunch of other stuff he's done. But yeah, I think it's fair to say Val and I kind of share the same common values when it comes to what we think makes a piece of art or a performance really shine. So that was kind of the beginning of a beautiful friendship, as they say.
Yeah, it sounds like I know he really likes a lot of realistic stuff, and it sounds like you like a lot of realistic stuff. And he did say that you do some non-traditional effects or whatever too later, but I'm sure you aim for realism with what you're doing, and that seems to definitely match up really well with Val.
Well, yeah, I think the big thing is Val and I are both very aware of different mediums.
Yeah.
And was it Cormac McLuhan said the medium is the message?
Marshall McLuhan. Marshall
what?
McLuhan.
Marshall. Where did I get Cormac from?
Cormac McCarthy. He's the author.
Oh, okay. I'm mixing. I mix stuff up all the time. But essentially, for a very long time, I realized that you kind of get these people that view different mediums as just different outlets for whatever story it is. And you see it most commonly in Hollywood. They go, hey, I've got this script, but it's an expensive script, so I'll turn it into a graphic novel. And
right.
People will love the graphic novel and then want to see the movie.
Yeah. But
what you get, of course, are these graphic novels that they look like storyboards. They're
right.
drab.
Yeah.
You can see a cinematic vision to them, but they're made by people who don't realize that people come to comic books because they love specifically what the comic book medium brings to the story, and to them, they enjoy it. It's like,
right.
I just went with my family. We saw a couple of musicals in December. We saw A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, and we saw Hamilton, and they were both written to be performed on a stage. They
right.
were paced, and the blocking and everything about the stage was utilized to not just in service of the story, but the story was written in service of the stage and audiences that love the stage. And so, Val and I are very aware of that. And we have a lot of conversations about, when we're shooting, for instance, the short film we're working on at the moment. Have you talked about that yet, Val?
He just touched on it.
Briefly, yeah.
Okay. So, Val and I were very kind of intent on saying, okay, we want to make a short film. What can we do within the medium of the camera and editing and these different things that will make it the best story that a short film can be, and understand that the audience for it is people who love film,
Right.
So you really have to be aware of who the audience is and what that medium is, and really kind of be adept in that medium in a way that ensures that you're really going to present something special, something that only that medium can do. And it's kind of, I think in a way, like I said, it's in service of the medium first. People say the story first, and the story is definitely a close second, but I think the medium is first. If you just see a medium as in service of your story, you're going to mess it up. Quite frankly, if you're not completely have some sort of awareness of how that medium speaks to people, and what the vocabulary is, then you get bad comic books, or you get whatever it is. Even like musicals, I've heard people go like, oh, Hamilton, it's I'm aware of the history of Alexander Hamilton, but the singing, and if they did it without that, I'd be interested. And like, well, the entire reason Hamilton is popular is because of the musical numbers. Right. I didn't want to see Hamilton on TV on Disney Plus like my girls wanted to see, because they had seen it and they had loved it. But I was like, no, I want to go and have that first experience be the stage, the actors in front of me. And people said, well, you should watch it because it's, it goes by fast and it's hard to follow, and you may get lost. I'm like, the point isn't following the story. The point is enjoying the presentation.
It's that whole experience.
Tell them about Quantum Terror.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the Quantum Terror is absolutely an example of this. The Quantum Terror is a Lovecraftian surrealist horror movie. It is definitely very different than pretty much. I think it's actually closer to a David Lynch movie than a horror movie, even though it is technically a horror movie. If you like John Carpenter and stuff like that kind of weird way he goes about horror, or David Cronenberg or David Lynch, you would like this. It's definitely influenced by movies like Alien and the sequel Aliens.
Right.
But essentially, I wanted to tell a story that was kind of in the vocabulary. And vocabulary is very important to me, if you haven't caught on already.
Right, yeah.
I liked how the surrealists used Freud as their vocabulary, not particularly because they thought Freud was the answer to everything. They just found that his psychology made a good vocabulary for surrealism. Right. I'm actually a fan of Carl Jung's student, who was Freud's student, who was Carl Jung. Right. And so I wanted to tell something using the Jungian vocabulary. And so it was a very simple premise. Originally, when I was a teenager, I had come back from Alien 3 very disappointed, because I was a big fan of the first two movies. Yep. And there were tunnels concrete wash tunnels you could run around not far from my neighborhood. And I wanted to make an Alien movie, and it never happened. I moved into this house in Kyle, Texas, just outside of Austin, and there were tunnels there too. And I thought, okay, I'm going to make this movie, except screw the Alien fan film, because you don't get to own the IP to that. So I came up with this story about these people who go into these underground tunnels looking for a missing person. It's a girl. Her sister is missing, and she's teamed up with her ex-boyfriend, who's kind of this nasty character, condescending, but he seems to know where her mind was at when she disappeared, even though he's suspected of maybe having done away with her. But they go down into these tunnels, And instead of, going in one end and coming out the other like they think they're going to do, they get lost in this Lovecraftian world where these alien entities that are trying to communicate with them, but because they are so literally the definition of the word alien, the communications go wrong. The people kind of start to go crazy. Creatures show up. So I'm in my garage studio right now, and Val can attest to this. I actually we had wash tunnels in our neighborhood, but they were only good for like establishing shots. So I went and built faux concrete tunnels in my garage. And it was kind of like the Star Trek set, they have them running down the same hall over and over again and just, make it look like it's a maze of starship hallways. We did that where we just kind of, the tunnels were literally built out of styrofoam. So they were very easy to move around sections. We were doing things like laying down tunnels that they were supposed to be climbing down, but instead they were just kind of like a la Adam West Batman, actually just crawling.
Right.
And it all really worked. I mean, when I got to the set, I thought it looks like what it is. It looks like styrofoam panels. And Christopher put some texturing and some spatters of paint on there to make it look like, stained concrete. And, but then when you actually see what goes back to what he says, understanding the medium, when you see the footage,
right,
it's like, this looks like a concrete tunnel, unless somebody actually put their hand through it or something, and it improved it to that it was. That's what it wasn't.
Yeah,
you just totally buy it, and it was just an amazing way to it's just like what filmmaking is. It's a storytelling thing. So you find ways to create this illusion of what's going on, and they really worked. I didn't think they wouldn't, but when I saw the footage, I could see how effective they really did work.
That's got to be tough for the lighting and stuff too, to make it look like concrete. Or
yeah, it comes down to a few things. I mean, like Val said, it's the medium of film is great because, like you said, nobody, like with the stage, the audience accepts these are actors on a stage. So whatever limitations they're confined to on the stage, they accept, and they make that part of the storytelling. With film, the great thing about it, or video these days, but film's a good shorthand still, I think.
Yeah.
It's all about what whatever you put in front of the camera doesn't have to actually be that thing. Like you said, no one can touch the styrofoam. The actors would. Sometimes the actors would forget that it was styrofoam and they just try to lean against it.
Yeah.
And it would buckle in. But, or another example is miniatures. We used a lot of miniatures. A matter of fact, hold on just a second. There's one right here.
Yeah.
As I knock everything over. So,
oh, nice.
Hello. So this is, one of the miniatures. And what we would do, you can see it's simply just, this is foam core.
Yeah.
And it's painted with a concrete texture.
Yeah.
Most of the miniatures were built by Heather Lowe, who's a friend of mine. She does a lot of doll houses and that sort of thing.
Cool.
But Jenna Green, who was on the show Face Off, did this one. And
nice.
What we would do is we did a lot of, what we realized is that, instead of doing a lot of green screen, there was some green screen work, but, green screen's very hard to match and convince people. People are wise to green screen.
Right.
So what I did was I came up with I kind of knocked off the filming style of Silence of the Lambs, where a lot of it would take you into the point of view of the character. And so we did that from the beginning. Even when we weren't working with miniatures, we were just working in the house or in an exterior. We would kind of have the character look at something and then we would break into a POV. So anyway, so the audience would get used to cutting away to a character's point of view.
Right.
So later on, if we wanted to do something like a miniature, which would be, say, a creature coming down the tunnel towards them, the creature we couldn't afford big creature suits or expensive effects. So we created puppets that match the size of the tunnels to scale. And and the tunnels are scaled down. We shoot with different lenses and different lighting to make it match the actual tunnel. And so a character would kind of look, and then we would cut to their point of view. Now, by that time, the audience is already used to it, so they're not thinking of it as a trick. They're just thinking of it as the vocabulary of the editing is that you cut away from the point of view. So the character would look, and suddenly you would see this creature that fills up the entire tunnel. Or another thing we did was we had tunnels that we were flooding. So we sandbagged all around these tunnels and then put the camera in a fish tank. So we could pour water down these tunnels, and it would, we'd add things in like, it's kind of funny, but I would add in things like spices from Spice Rack because they're very little flaky, look like debris, and shaving cream to make the water look like it was frothing. And then we just slowed down the footage, and we'd pour water in, and the water would come rushing at the camera, but it'd be safe inside the fish tank. So again, we had flooding, we could do things like flood tunnels and have creatures coming down it. And again, it's, miniatures or sets made out of materials that are cheap, but still, like I said, the art of film lets you get away with so much of that. And I think the vocabulary of filmmaking is really the edit, you can progress through time in a way that, you jump, but yet the audience is in their brain, they put it all together and they just accept it. So, that's why you can have epics that span decades, or you can have, something that occurs in a night. It's odd, sometimes people try and make real-time movies. It's like, ooh, why are you doing that? That's like the antithesis of what filmmaking is about.
When I was mentioning earlier about would I have had the wherewithal to discipline myself to go to New York and struggle to be and get into Marvel as opposed to how easy it was when I met Dan. The same thing was with me as an actor. And so I've been fortunate enough to over the past 30 years to run into guys like Christopher, who we speak the same, we really have the same aesthetic sense. And as you can tell, he's really into creating these illusions, with the vocabulary of filmmaking. And I think I confessed this to Christopher a couple of weeks ago. I don't think I would have had the temperament to go to Los Angeles and get up every day at 6 o'clock to go to auditions and just struggle like that for years and years and years. And fortunately, I end up, after a period of time, running into a guy like this, and we can get something done. We can do things. And in some ways, it's even better because we're not worried about, we're part of the LA, entertainment machine, and we're expected to produce this kind of a thing in this particular time frame. And, we can do the kind of stuff that interests us. And so that's the way I've navigated through this. And I think Christopher's kind of the same way, although he's not been an artist. He has done some paintings, some interesting paintings. But this is about people trying to tell stories with certain mediums, and how these mediums, they intersperse, they crisscross, and you meet people that can take you somewhere else. Because one thing that bugs me about being an artist is I'm doing it all alone. I'm always doing it alone. And one of the reasons I went out and did theater at night was because I could get out and work with people. I like the collaborative process. I like bouncing ideas off of people. I'm not a prima donna. I'm not a guy like Barry Smith who isolates himself and creates all this genius work. That's just not me.
Honestly, I mean, like I said, one of the great things about working with Val is exactly as he says. We're kind of both. I used to live in Hollywood. I actually, I grew up about 40 minutes outside of Hollywood in a town called Thousand Oaks, where a lot of the celebrities lived. A matter of fact, I feel stupid to this day about it, and I'm sure I've told this story before on other podcasts and shows. But I used to sell comic books to Leonardo DiCaprio, but I didn't realize it was him. I have this weird tendency to not recognize celebrities when they're right in front of me. I also worked at a store that sold stuff to Rod Steiger, different people. But Hollywood has a certain mentality, and even people who are not famous and not behind the velvet rope
Right.
had this attitude of like, for years and years, and for years it was true. You have to do it this way. You've got to come up with you got to have your pitch, and you've got to get it to certain people, and they are the ones that, and then they'll rewrite it with you. And then, it may be that it never comes to be, but then they hold the rights, and then that you're out of luck. And as the internet grew and more open source and crowdfunding and all this, just it became possible. I mean, even the camera I'm speaking to you on now is my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, which I shot with Val,
Right.
So we've gotten to a point with the technology. It's both, it's accessible, it's affordable. It is damn good. You can do, really good stuff with it. Where just two guys can get together. And that's what this short film, and I don't want to give too much of it away in case Val, I don't know how much Val said about it, but
he didn't say too much. He just touched on it real quick.
Well, it's just, essentially Val's, I won't say the plot, but Val's like, I have this character, he's riding a horse, he goes to this house looks a certain way, and there's a ranch I have access to. And then he found these people that had this house, and the house was a very interesting house, very beautiful looking, old. The owners had ghost stories to tell.
Oh, wow.
So, and the house and the ranch were in two different locations, but we were able to, of course, Val drew up storyboards and said, this is what I want to do. And so we followed the storyboards, and it can be edited together. And then after we looked at it, we went, hey, you know what? We need a few more scenes. So Val and I are going to go in a couple of weeks, shoot a few more scenes. We can just pick up the camera and do that. And you can go, like I said, with the Quantum Terror, it's a feature film. And there are ways to self-distribute that, which is what I'm going to do. I did submit to some distribution companies, but I'm actually very enamored right now with what people are doing, crowdfunding their comic books. Especially the people who aren't crowdfunding the production, but crowdfunding the deliverables. Rather than saying, hey, give us this money. And I'm not saying either way is wrong to do it. There are people that are going like, hey, I need to pay this artist and, this sort of thing. So they'll crowdfund for a certain amount. But the fact that you can say, hey, we've got it, it's done. I crowdfunded the Quantum Terror, and it's been 6 years, and I'm only now just getting the movie ready for distribution. So that things can go longer than you would expect. So Val's got his projects, I've got mine, and we both kind of have this mutual agreement like, hey, I'll write you a role of mine, and I'll come shoot your thing. And we can just go do that. And as you see, I've got a green screen behind me. It takes up the entire I don't know if I can, let's see. Woo. Okay, that's as wide as it goes, but
that's okay.
But it's spans the entire back wall of my garage. I've got a bunch of lights. I've got gimbals, sound equipment, that sort of thing. So I can do stuff in my garage with miniatures or actors. And we're restrained by budget, obviously. But we don't have to give up our intellectual property to do it. We don't have to amass a whole crew. We can get a couple of actors here and there. And also, if you want to do more experimental stuff, if I want to do a movie that's more like a David Lynch movie than a blockbuster, I can go and do that. And the risk is pretty nominal. Video on demand is loosened up in a way where I think you're going to see a few things. You're going to see lengths of movies and television shows become wildly varied, where before you had to kind of time them for, television slots or a certain amount of showings in a day. And you're also going to see people be able to be more experimental again, because now with the low budgets and the way you can deliver it to an audience pretty much any which way, and you can focus on these niche audiences, and you don't have to go to China, like, oh, it's got to be more accessible for China. It's like, China throws out most of our stuff anyway. Why are we trying to cater to China? It's a different culture,
And they keep so much of the money.
Well, that's the other thing too with Hollywood. It's like, I was tired of going like, oh, you've got to do that. You've got to appease these people to get behind the velvet rope. And then you have to make compromises on what you want to do. It's like that used to be a fact of life. And now I can do it my way. And I really do want to. That's why I left Hollywood. It's believe me, there's a lot easier ways to make money than pretty much any artistic pursuit. You do it because you love it. And yes, I think making money is a good hallmark of success. It shows that there's enough people that want to pay for it. But now I can take chances. I can do things on a few $1,000s budget that used to be multi-million-dollar budgets before. I can have giant monsters. I can have, and I can cast who I want, and I like I said, working with Val is great because Val has the same attitude. He doesn't want to pull up with that bull. He loves doing it. And so I'm always like going like, Val, I wrote this script. There's a role in it here, for you.
Right.
Or even if there's not a role in it, he sends me things like poems and interviews with other actors and script ideas, and I send him my stuff and we have great conversations about it. So even when it's not specifically a working relationship and we're both working on the same project, it's just a great relationship. We're always on the phone and chatting. I even joked, I told Val the other day, I think my wife's worried that he and I are going to run off together. So
yeah.
I have a friend, he's probably one of the great American puppeteers, goes by Ghetto. And he literally did grow up in the ghetto.
Wow.
And now he does puppet shows that are kind of based on that. And he's very, he has very strong opinions about racism and how he feels as a Black person he's been treated in the area that he's in. And I can't speak for him in terms of those things, but he puts on these brilliant puppet shows. They're live events, and he has a niche. He is very successful at it where he is. I have an interview with him on my own YouTube channel.
Cool.
And, he's someone that I would absolutely love to work with. Especially, I would love to do, if I do a Lovecraftian series, it would be an anthology series and it would be in black and white. And I would love to do an episode that is purely puppets, like not like, oh, we're going to use these puppets as a practical effect and make them look like a monster or something. Like very clearly have it be his puppets and have him tell the story in a way that only the kind of puppets he builds, because he's a very specific kind of puppet. They're not Muppets. They're these brilliant marionettes that he makes out of cardboard and wood and I would love to see that. And I think that there would be, again, it may not be something that people want as a whole series, but it may be that if it's under, I think umbrellas are a big thing. Like you have Love, Death, and Robots. You have, what is it? Black Mirror. There's another one like into the, it was a sci-fi one on Amazon, something like Into the Loop. Into the Loop. That was it. And, I think that one, a lot of people complain that was about 15 minutes worth of content stretched out to an hour. They didn't quite get that they didn't have to fit it into an hour yet. But the thing is that if like Black Mirror is an umbrella, you get a different story every time. But because people understand, okay, Black Mirror, I'm going to get dystopian sci-fi. They're like, it's a Black Mirror story I'm in for. Or the Twilight Zone being one of the oldest examples. So if you always say like, hey, Lovecraftian, series of, that all are in black and white, you can do so many different things with that in different ways. But once you've cultivated the audience there, you don't have to sell it to them every single time. They go, okay, that's this. Or with, like I said, the sci-exploitation is the one where I'm really at the moment. Like one episode could be live action and all green screen. One could be animated, but if it's got the same kind of color schemes and the same, like, oh, it's not realistic sci-fi. It's more on the fantasy end, like Star Wars, but and even Doug Mayfield and we have something called Dream Umbrella, which is kind of the umbrella that the other stories that we're coming up with will fit under. And so the idea is, like I said, cultivate the audience for the umbrella.
Yeah.
And then as long as you keep kind of delivering on the basic promise in a quality way,
Right.
they'll keep coming back for it. As long as you don't, you've seen it, people go like, okay, I can rest on my laurels now.
Right.
You know, and chintz out. I noticed that you posted earlier on in the image from Harbinger Down, which I was part of the crowdfunding campaign for,
right.
which wasn't, I got to do some creature designs, but that was Alec Gillis from Studio 80i who did that. Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah, it's on the left.
So that was purely he and his partner Tom Woodruff Jr., who have worked on Alien 3, the Aliens versus Predator movies, Alien Resurrection, Tremors, Starship Troopers, the Santa Claus, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man. They did the Green Goblin. I don't if you've seen the Green Goblin, like the original animatronic makeup they wanted to do.
Yeah.
They did that. All sorts of stuff, but they had done animatronics for the Thing prequel, and they're like, wow, this is like John Carpenter, Rob Bottin.
Yeah.
This is like the holy grail of projects.
Yeah.
And they did that, and then it all got painted over with CGI, which was heartbreaking to them. Because again, it's not just about the money. They they love this.
Yeah.
So they did that crowdfunding campaign, and they came up with, it's on Amazon and it's on Tubi, I think a pretty decent, like Roger Corman style B movie, Alien the Thing knockoff on a boat. Like when you watch them, you got to go, okay, I realize this is a low budget knockoff, but when you watch it from that point of view and that style, and that, again, that's like part of the specific medium, it's a really good movie. It's got Lance Henriksen in it, and I'm really proud to this day to be a part of it. I actually wrote a book about the making of it. That's available on Amazon. It's like a little picture book with behind the scenes of stuff like that. And that really inspired me to do the Quantum Terror. And Alec actually sent me some animatronic tentacles over. He mailed them, let me borrow them, like ship them over so I could have them in the Quantum Terror.
Yeah.
And then another friend of mine, who is a prominent, I don't know if he'll want me to say his name or not, but I'll say this. He's a prominent creature designer who has worked for every big name in Hollywood you can think of, like Ridley Scott, James Cameron, J.J. Abrams, George Lucas, not George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. Maybe he did work for Lucas. I don't know. Anyway. And we became friends because he saw my work. And I was like, wait a minute, you won awards. You're working with the biggest budget people in the world. Like, what is it about? And he's like, your work's just really inspired me, and he did a short film, and he's like, and he used techniques that I used in mine. And he said, you did this, you inspired me to do this. And I'm like, holy shit, really? And he has been sending me stuff. He's now working with LED volumes, and he doesn't have a lot of money to do this stuff. He's still, he's working with A-list people, but he's still, he's spending his own money. He's roping in talent. And I think, this is where it's going to be at. I think, no matter what the color of your skin is, or your sexual orientation, or your religion, or, whatever it may be. Like, look, I think Hollywood is dead. I don't say that like Hollywood's going to cease to be. I just mean that in the sense that what it used to be and the power it used to have is no more. Yeah. And I think the more people try and still sink themselves into Hollywood, you're just throwing away your great ideas, your individuality. And that's really, I call myself a meritocratic capitalist. It's like, if you have the merit, if you have the imagination, and you have the will to create these things, then you deserve the rewards for those. And you really, I think, talk about a diverse representation of cultures and ideas. I mean, what better way to do that than to kind of invest in yourself as an individual and tell those stories from specifically the point of view that you want to tell them from. And I think if you do it on a good, if you're responsible with your budget, and you're sincere, you're not going at it with, some agenda, but you're actually speaking from, a place of you know, your own personal values, not collective, not propaganda, not a certain trend or message or something like that, but just purely you, no matter who you are, where you're from, what you look like.
Right.
I think you can find an audience for that. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's possible in Hollywood. I think that's possible when you know, take control of your own destiny and go independent, you know, and who knows, you know, what is it? Captain Picard said, of course, you could do everything right and still lose. That's just life.
Right.
I know I'm paraphrasing that poorly, but
I like me some Captain Picard, so
I'm still more of a Kirk man myself.
yeah, well, I figured
When Kirk came down in that capsule, the Blue Oregon capsule,
yeah,
I cried a little, because there's a guy, 1960s, even after Star Trek, that guy was like driving around from theater to theater, little theatrical acting jobs, sleeping in his car,
yeah,
you know, and he never gave up on it. And to go from that to being in your 90s and swimming with sharks, which he also did when he
right,
was 90, and actually being so valued by so many people as a, you know, that his contributions, his work, and that character that he played meant so much to so many people, that we all, except for some people who wanted to be bitter about it for some reason that I do not understand
right,
whatsoever. But he went from, you know, if you could go and tell that guy, you know, knock on his car window while he's trying to sleep, you know, in between acting jobs, hey, you're going to be so beloved that you're actually going to get to go into space, and
yeah,
people are going to applaud it and feel, you know, happy about that. I mean, that just he added that value, that Star Trek and
oh
that
yeah,
character added value in a way that meant so much to so many people, that really felt like a monumental moment. And I think, even though I don't believe in celebrity worship, what I do believe in is you see people who are successful in ways that you yourself may want to emulate,
yeah,
and you use them as a role model, you know, and you applaud them when they do well. I mean,
yeah,
what a life. In your 90s, you get to swim with sharks and be shot into space, and people really love what you contributed to their life with that character. I mean, that's fantastic. That's something that I don't need to be shot into space, but, you know, it would
right,
mean a lot to me if I created something that meant something to enough people that, you know, it was useful. I think that's
right,
what we do as storytellers. We're not trying to, I think it's not about delivering a message or a lesson. It's just, you create something that's sincere and you hope that it is useful to the people who consume it.
but wait, there's more. I am here with Robert Rhine, one of the main people behind the Maniacal Smile. It's a graphic novel. Like, this time around, it's a graphic novel that you guys are doing, right?
Yes, yes. It's collecting issues 8 through 11 of our run with Fierce Comics.
Okay, cool. So it's kind of like a trade paperback or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, I have. Although I'm okay, Rob and I have never been super close, but we've known each other for a long time. We're both part of the Tampa Bay comic people, and I've always loved his art style. I like I like a lot of styles, but I do like cartoony stuff. And I know I told him I kind of like stuff like Joe Mad and a bunch of different people like that too. So
Yeah.
so I dig. I do dig his style. So I wanted to dig into that a little bit before we talk about their Kickstarter. How did you get into like drawing and doing comics and stuff?
So, I mean, it all pretty much started from being a little kid, being all into, the Marvel cards, like back in 1990.
Yeah,
That's where it really started for me, like with Nightcrawler and everything. My older brother was really big into comics as a kid. He's 8 years older than me, and he was a fantastic artist. So everything kind of spawned from that for me. And then going into high school, I just kept doodling, and I created Smiley literally on my 16th birthday. So he's like
nice.
older than I want to admit to being. But I put out the very first book in high school. I think I made like 50 copies, and I thought, hey, I'll sell them for $5 a piece. These crappy little black and white magazines with only like
Yeah.
7 pages of unfinished artwork. And I
Nice.
thought the worst part was, oh, I'm not really a sports guy, so this is gonna get me some chicks because I'm drawing.
Yeah.
No.
Now it might, but
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm married.
when all like along the line did you hook up with Ben and get involved with Fierce and everything?
It was 2008. We actually ended up at a free comic book day event with a local comic book store here in the Tampa area, and I had seen them, at various conventions a couple of times with their Redneck Red book that they were putting
Yeah.
out at that time, and I think we had all gotten together with a couple of other local creators for a free comic book day book. Like we all kind of
Right.
split the cost, and then we put it out there.
Yeah.
And I remember Ben was kind of like, your character is so weird, and I read a book that I found at a shop somewhere, and it made me feel like I needed to take a bath. It was so, because back then I was all about, I like to say that the book is like South Park meets the Tick, and it is.
Yeah.
But back then it was much more South Park than Tick. I was going for
Right.
anything I could to make it as silly and over the top as I could.
Right.
So anyways, we ended up having a dinner, like, meeting about something, and I just asked him, I was like, hey man, what do you think about publishing Smiley? And he thought about it for a second, and he's like, if we can bring some of this down a little bit, I see a lot of potential with it. Instead of it being so overtly
Yeah.
gross and everything,
Right.
and toilet humor, let's bring it to more of a Shrek level. And it's a winning formula. It really it's made the
Yeah.
book that much better. In fairness, I mean, the book, through its run with Fierce thus far, I mean, we have gone through a lot of silly, like very silly things in the book.
Right.
And I mean, that's pretty much the whole purpose of it, is to just, it's a silly superhero comic book, but we want people to laugh. We want people to just enjoy it. There's not a
Right.
massive message behind it. There's not, it's literally, it's just something for you to enjoy, and that's what we want to put out with it.
Smiley appeared in a video game, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What game was that?
It was called Comic Jumper: The Adventures of Captain Smiley, and it was out on the Xbox 360 about 12 years ago.
Like, I don't know if I could see a live action Smiley, but
No.
it's like I could definitely see an animated. If somebody wanted to do an animated thing, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, that would be awesome. My
Especially-
biggest dream is to have an action figure made. That's like my biggest dream.
I actually was just this past week looking at our board games and saw Smiley board game that our son bought because he loved it and thought.
Have you played it?
Oh, I played it a little bit. He actually, and this is pretty funny because it's kind of a gross board game.
Yes.
With inside of body parts and things, and he's played it several times with my mother. Actually,
that's outstanding. Yes. That's the best news I've heard all night, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And she's just like, what? And she'll just play and have fun with him playing and everything. But it's funny.
That's so cool, man.
Do it. Yeah,
that's awesome. You got to thank him for me. That's great.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, he's a good promoter for the game for sure.
That's great. Yeah, we ran out of them a little while ago. We actually sold out of all the ones that we had, and we want to do like a 2.0 version, but instead of having the cardboard playing pieces, we want to have minis. So
nice.
We're working on that. Another in the long laundry list of things that have to be done.
So tell us about the Kickstarter. I know you guys are funded. You guys hit the goal, but obviously you always want more because there's not that much profit to be able to put into other things, and obviously as creators you always want more, not just to be able to live and feed your kids, but also to be able to fund other projects. I did want to ask you, are you the one that does the lettering on your book too?
No, actually, that's the one job I don't do. Everything else I do, from the pencils, inks, and colors. Pat Batten, who is the third wheel of our tricycle, he does the lettering, and he does an amazing job. He comes up
Yeah.
with great logos and everything.
Like he has fun with it, like your Banana Republic thing. See, I feel like and I feel like that's a conspiracy for Ben to get his name into the title.
I wish it was, man. I wish it was. That would be so kismet. But no, I actually based the character off of a friend of mine in high school. Ben, the Psycho Monkey, was the very first bad guy that I ever created for Smiley. And it literally just happens to be kismet that they're the same name.
Yeah, because that was before. Yeah. And for those who don't know, Ben Philippak, or however you say his name. How do you say his last name?
Filipiak.
Is the publisher, and I guess editor, maybe.
Yes, he's a publisher, editor. He also co-created Redneck Red. He created Midwalker, which is another one of our titles. Yeah. And he also created our horror anthology, The Hearse-Load of Horror.
So tell us about the Kickstarter. I know you're adding cards and doing some different things. So I guess tell us whatever you think people might be interested in.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, the 2-second pitch is, again, the comic is like South Park meets The Tick. So it's about a superhero who is not very good at being a superhero. He wears an inflatable rubber suit to make himself look the part of the hero. Nice. And it's actually pretty advanced as far as the mechanics of it. But there was only one owner's manual for the suit, and he actually used it as toilet paper. So nobody knows all the different powers that are aligned with that suit. His uncle used to be a hero back in the day by the name of Limbs. He had giant arms and legs, but they were severed, and he is now quadriplegic man. And he's a genius. Like, all the technological things that are happening in the city and with Smiley, they're all thanks to his genius. Nice. The book is it's pretty out there. It's silly. Right. Smiley has irritable bowel syndrome. That is his superpower, which helps keep his suit inflated. He can fly via his own thermal propulsion. Yeah. And he just has a rogues gallery of nonsensical things, like Ben the Psycho Monkey, the atomic jellyfish. Heck, there was even a time where he got a tapeworm, and I don't want to get into it, but it was pretty funny what happened with that. But yeah. And we hit our funding goal a little while ago. We're currently 175% funded, I believe. And we just hit the point where we could announce our third stretch goal. So the first stretch goal was a bookmark. The second stretch goal was a magnet. And the third stretch goal is one of possibly many trading cards of the characters, which starts out with Ben the Psycho Monkey, the main bad guy.
Nice. Yeah. And I like the way Psycho Monkey looks too. He's cool. So what day does it end?
It's going to end on February 15th.
Okay.
We did that on purpose just to get it one day past Valentine's Day, so we can be silly about it and be like, get something for the lady in your life. I'm sure she'd love this.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Or maybe so you could probably play the other angle and have it be the ladies that get it for their man.
I go for the losing underdog, so I'm going to hope that the special ladies in the life really want to read it. Actually, I wanted to give a shout out to you because I had reached out to you with regards to the Kickstarter. This is our first attempt. Yeah. So I know you've done a couple of them, and you were really awesome with giving us some advice and everything. So thank you for that. But as far as the tiers are concerned, we have funny names for all of our tiers because why not? So the very first tier, I'm not going to go into all of them, but the very first one is literally just the book itself. We call that the no flair bare minimum. Yeah. And then it incrementally goes up. You can get sketches inside the book. You can get copies of all of our different trades in one tier, and you can get original artwork. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and definitely pledge and help them. And definitely you men out there and you women, if you want to get this extremely romantic gift.
So romantic.
Yes, for your special someone. I highly recommend it, especially if you're married for a while, because then you're like used to all the.
That's why it works for me. My wife loves it now. Right. It's great.
Exactly. Once you get comfortable and you're used to it, it's like, hey. But anyways, thank you for being on. I do hope we can get you at least a few more people back in it.
All right, man. Thank you so much, dude.